Welcome to the 2023 Gabelli School of Business Graduate Diploma Ceremony at Fordham University.
Wow. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Dean Axoy. How exciting it is to be here with you all today to celebrate another phenomenal class of Fordham University graduates, the class of 2023. Yes. To the family members gathered here today, including my daughters, Avery and Alyssa, to the faculty and the staff, to my fellow Fordham University Board of Trustees, and to our not so new anymore Fordham University President Tanya Tedlow. Thank you all for being here, but most importantly, thank you for all that all of you have done to help get this class of graduates here on your very special day. When I was invited to speak at today's ceremony, I eagerly accepted. Of course, was my response to Dean Axoy. Why, might you ask? Because so much of what is good in my life today started where you all are, right here at Fordham University. This was a pivot point in my life. I met my husband, Tony, my rock of 39 years, in the Rose Hill Gym at a Fordham men's basketball game. Yes, and he's watching from Florida. I got my first job working at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York with the help of Fordham's Career Planning and Placement Office. So yes, Dean Axoy, I will be there, and I would be honored to speak. Then the Fordham team said to me that they would like for me to share my story and speak about overcoming obstacles. Well, there is not enough time in the 5 minutes that they gave me to speak to you all today to share the countless struggles that brings me to this moment. But trust me, I have had more than my fair share. To put it in perspective, when writing my memoir that was referenced a bit ago and shopping it to publishing houses, I was told that the story was not believable, that all of that trauma does not happen to a single person in one lifetime. Well, it did. Statistics would suggest that I am not supposed to be here standing before you right now. So I decided to use one of my favorite poems to help share just a few snippets of my story to inspire the thoughts and learnings that I have for you today. It is a poem written by Langston Hughes, and it is entitled Mother to Son. Many of you may recognize its most famous and frequently repeated refrain, "Life for me ain't been no crystal stair." But the truth is, the poem in its entirety is instructive for pushing through adversity. And the first section of the poem is written as follows. Life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpets on the floor, bare. That passage speaks to me about growing up right here in the Bronx, not far from where we are today. And in my memoir, I tell stories of a life full of struggles and setbacks. The struggles of moving every year across the Bronx in search of adequate housing meant a new school for me every year. In one of the stories, I talk about being about 10 years old, sleeping on a cot in the bedroom, and a rat ran across my chest. Or the shift to Catholic high school right up Fordham Road, across town, in the attempt to change my environment in which my teenage friends and I were doing drugs and some getting pregnant. Or working 5 to 6 hours every day after high school classes to help pay for that Catholic high school education that we could not afford. Things started to look up, though, after my first year of high school. But then one of my 2 older brothers took his own life in my sophomore year. It rocked our family. I wasn't sure about going to college after that, but my mother insisted. She had only a 6th grade education, and she wanted to make sure that I fulfilled mine. I knew I needed to stay close to home, to be close to Mom, which is how I ended up at Fordham University. But then in my sophomore year here, my mother took her own life as well. A complete blow to our family, a second one that we never saw coming. I was lost, and not only did the floors have no carpet, the rooms had no floors, they had no walls, and there was barely any air. Langston's next passage resonates with me about that time where he says, "But all the time, I've been a climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light." I'm here to tell you that I could not see any light no matter where I turned. So I dropped out of Fordham University when my mom died. I had lost my light too. My remaining older brother, Jay, and I, who I think is watching today too, have been fiercely committed to each other since. But my grandmother, she was my source of strength and my lifeline during those dark moments. The first and only time I saw my very strong grandmother cry was when my mother died. My grandmother was a woman who sharecropped in South Carolina to feed 6 children. I believe that it was she who Langston Hughes had in mind when he penned that poem 100 years ago. That still resonates with me today, and I hope resonates with you as well. When the youngest of my grandmother's children was just 1 year old, grandmother was evicted from her home in South Carolina just 3 days after my grandfather was killed. The landowner put locks on the barn where they kept the farm equipment and asked her to leave, she and her 6 children, because he did not believe that she could sharecrop the land without a man in the house. He didn't know my grandmama. They had nowhere to go. The family split up. The children went to different homes of family members because no one family could take all 6 of them. But Grandma worked, she cooked, she cleaned, she planted trees until she could bring her family back together again. Imagine how that felt. You see, my grandmother was a descendant of enslaved people, not given the privilege of being able to read or write. She learned to write and sign her name in her 60s when I was just a little girl in order to exercise her right to vote, something that she was determined to do. And I sat fixated as a child, listening to the stories of our family struggles. But after Mom died, I needed to be in my grandmother's presence. I needed the strength that I knew that my grandmother could give me to close the void of my mother's absence. And I would constantly go down to South Carolina and sit with her on the porch. And we would sit and cry in silence, staring at the fields in front of the porch. And on one particular occasion, Grandma looking ahead into the fields, and she simply said, came out of the silence and said to me, "She forgot. She must have forgotten what I taught her that the good Lord don't put nothing more on you than you can bear. And then she turned and she looked at me and she said, so get yourself back in school. That's what your mother would have wanted. You can do it. Now go, and don't you stop. In that moment, my grandmother was teaching me what generations of those before her had been taught. And when I think about it, every time I think about it, I think about Harriet Tubman and what she said to my ancestors, enslaved Africans, that she was leading to freedom. She said, when you hear the dogs, don't stop. Don't stop running. Run until you see a glimmer of light in the window. And Langston Hughes, back to the poem, said to mother or son, he said, so boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on them steps because you finds it's kinda hard. Don't you fall now. So in these words, Grandma gave me the clarity that I needed and that I vowed to never forget. And I came home, and I came back to Fordham University, and I ain't been the same since. I came back. In fact, I stand before you today with a very clear sense of purpose, and it is to make my grandmother and my mother proud. They walk with me everywhere I go. I call them my two angels. One sits on their shoulder, one sits on that, and they sit with me here today. And I promise them to not only get, but create education and opportunity that neither of them was afforded, and to be an example to others, an inspiration to others, that you can push through adversity in search of the light for yourself and for others. When I came back, my Fordham family was there for me. They attended my mom's funeral. They were there every step of the way, which is why I'm so committed to Fordham today. I joined the Fed. I spent 2 decades there, 12 years at JP Morgan. No one would outwork me. No one would be as determined as me, no matter how it got. There were tacks and splinters along the way, and sometimes what felt like lashes on my back. The first woman this, the first woman of color that, the first black woman. It was all very hard. It sounds good on the resume, but trust me, it was hard, and it was never what I was after. Somewhere along the way, I realized, for reasons that I still cannot explain today, that God put me here for this purpose, to experience all of that so that I could be right here in front of you, from the projects to the podium, to share with you that you can do it too. But for you to do it, for you to push through adversity, there are just 3 nuggets of many that I hope that I have shared with you, that I hope you take away from my story, my mother's story, my grandmother's story, and from Langston's words. Nugget number 1, you cannot give up. Life is hard. Work is hard. Adversity is guaranteed. Notice I have not say overcome adversity, because I believe you must push through it. It's not something you can go around or avoid. You have to push through it as if you're in a heavy windstorm and you're bracing against the wind. Fight against the wind, even if you don't feel it, even if you can't explain it. Keep going, keep trying, even if the dogs are barking. And it may not make sense, but don't lose faith. It is not whether you will struggle, but how you recover. Nugget 2, do what you can from where you sit in the service of others. Don't be ashamed of the story. We all have them. I can't tell you how many times I've shared my story and it released someone to share their own. When we share our story, we help others heal. Share the stories, share the lessons, share the opportunities, and also share the riches. Because by helping others, you help yourself. The struggle was meant for you. I said I couldn't explain it, but I understand that it was meant for me. But it wasn't meant just for me. It was meant for me to be able to share with you that you are going to experience struggle. That struggle is your struggle to learn from and then give those lessons to someone else. Everybody has a story. As leaders, commit yourself to understanding the stories of others, because too many of today's challenges are because leaders care more about themselves than they care for others. What kind of leader will you be is the question you should be asking yourselves. And finally, my friends, nugget number 3, if perhaps all of them are equally important, but I would say to you that nugget number 3 is know what you need to restore yourself. You will have moments of being overwhelmed, of wanting to give in, of not seeing any light, of not knowing what's next. My advice to you is to know yourself, know whose you are, and know what you need and who you need to keep going, to get to the light, because there is light on the other side of adversity. There's abundance on the other side of adversity. Sit down on the steps, catch your breath, connect with your resources to refuel, get clear, but get back up and keep pushing against the wind. Because if you give up or you don't refuel, you will never know what's waiting on the other side of adversity for you. Langston closes the poem by saying, "For I still going, honey, and I still climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal stair." Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful speech and sharing your inspirational message with our graduates, Valerie.